The phone at the front desk rang at 3:17 in the morning. Elise Turner almost didn't pick up. She'd been the night manager at the Hollow Creek Motel for 2 years, and she knew the sound of a prank call when she heard one. But she was already on the other line with her sister in Spokane, and she didn't want to hang up. Her sister had been crying about her divorce for 40 minutes. Elise let the front desk phone ring. 6 rings. 7. Rain hitting the lobby windows. She finally told her sister to hold on and picked up on the 9th ring. Nobody spoke, but someone was there. She could hear him breathing, slow, steady, like a man who had all the time in the world. Then he said 6 words. "Tell them to check room 408. The line went dead. Elise stood there for a long moment, holding the phone. Outside, a truck hissed past on the wet highway. The lobby clock ticked. She would think about that voice for the rest of her life. It didn't sound scared. It sounded tired. Like he'd been waiting a long time to make that call. Welcome to the unseen hour, where the truth is darker than you think. Hollow Creek, Montana is the kind of place you pass through without meaning to. One gas station, one diner, a motel off Route 12 with a neon sign that hums all night. Most guests stay one night and forget the name by morning. Elise took the master key off the hook and walked upstairs. Room 408 was at the end of the hall, where one of the ceiling lights had been flickering for weeks. Maintenance kept saying they'd fix it. They never did. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again. Nothing. But when she pressed her ear to the door, she heard something on the other side. A soft hiss, like a television left on, playing nothing but static. She slid the master key into the lock and turned it. The key turned, but the door didn't open. Something was holding it shut from the inside. The deadbolt, the chain, maybe both. Elise took a step back from the door. Then she went downstairs and called the sheriff. Deputy Marcus Hale showed up 20 minutes later. He was 41 years old, and he'd worked in Hollow Creek his whole career. Nothing much ever happened there. That was how he liked it. Elise handed him the master key in the hallway outside room 408. She told him about the phone call, about the breathing, about the voice. Hale turned the key. The lock clicked. But the door didn't move. He put his shoulder against it, once, twice. On the 3rd try, something on the other side snapped, a chain, a slide bolt, and the door swung open. The room was empty. No suitcase, no clothes, no sign anyone had slept in the bed. The blanket was still tucked tight the way the housekeepers left it. Only 3 things were out of place. The television was on, playing static, black and white snow. A wooden chair had been pulled away from the desk and turned to face the window. It sat there empty, angled toward the parking lot, as if someone had been sitting in it for a long time, watching something. And on the nightstand, face up under the lamp, was a single Polaroid photograph. Hale picked it up by the edges. It showed a young woman. She was standing outside, in front of the motel's neon sign. She was looking straight at the camera, not smiling, not scared, just looking. Along the bottom, written in black ink, were 5 words. She was here at 2:41. Hale stopped breathing. He knew that face. He had been looking for that face for 11 years. 11 years ago, Marcus Hale had been a 29-year-old rookie. On a cold morning in October, he'd been the one to find a car pulled over on the shoulder of Route 12. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat. A cherry pie in a to-go box, still warm. The car belonged to a 23-year-old diner waitress named Sarah Whitmore. Sarah had been bringing the pie home to her mother, who couldn't sleep without something sweet after dinner. They never found Sarah. The case broke the town. It broke her mother, who lived another 6 years and never threw out that box. It broke 2 marriages in the sheriff's department. And it broke Marcus Hale, who still drove past that stretch of Route 12 on his way to work every morning, and who still looked. He had never stopped looking. Now, standing in a motel room at 4 in the morning, he was holding a photograph of her, a photograph that could not exist. Hale noticed it first. The neon sign in the picture had a crack running through the letter C in Creek. That crack was new. A thunderstorm had split the sign open 3 years ago. Hale remembered, because his brother-in-law had been the one to fix it. Badly. Which meant the photograph of Sarah Whitmore, a woman who had been missing for 11 years, had been taken sometime in the last 3. She was alive. Or she had been. Recently enough to stand in front of a sign that didn't exist when she disappeared. Hale sat down on the edge of the bed. He didn't feel his hands. The motel had security cameras. Cheap ones, grainy black and white. 2 at the entrance, 1 in the lobby, 1 in each stairwell. At 2:41 in the morning, exactly the time written on the photograph, a woman walked through the front door of the Hollow Creek Motel. She wore a long dark coat. Her hair was tied back. The hood was up. She didn't sign the guest book. She didn't look at the desk. She walked straight past Elise, who was on the phone, and never looked up. The woman went up the stairs. The second-floor camera caught her turning down the hallway toward the east wing. And that was the last frame she appeared in. The camera at that end of the hall didn't cover the final 3 rooms. 406, 407, 408. It never had. The motel had cut costs years ago when they replaced the system, but there was nowhere else she could have gone. The hallway was a dead end. No fire exit. No windows on that floor opened wide enough for a person. The back stairwell hadn't been touched in months. The dust on the steps was undisturbed. She had walked into one of those 3 rooms. 2 of them were empty. By sunrise, the sheriff's office had reopened Sarah Whitmore's case for the first time in 9 years. Hale went through the motel's old records. The building had changed owners 3 times since Sarah disappeared. The paperwork was a mess. Half the guest registers were missing. The rest were stored in cardboard boxes in the basement. Hale spent the whole morning down there. What he found was this. 11 years ago, the same week Sarah vanished, a man had been staying in room 408. He'd been there for 6 weeks. He paid in cash, every Tuesday. The staff at the time remembered him because he never made eye contact. He always paid with exact change. Never a penny off. He signed the register as Miles Rowan. Occupation? Photographer. He checked out the morning after Sarah disappeared. Nobody ever saw him again. Until 2 nights ago. A man had checked into room 408 under a different name, paid cash, exact change. The clerk who checked him in was a young woman named Rachel. And in the basement, Hale found something else. It was a shoebox. Inside were 9 Polaroids. Each one showed a different person. A man pumping gas, a woman walking a dog, a teenage girl waiting at a bus stop, a couple loading groceries into a station wagon. None of them were looking at the camera. None of them knew they were being photographed. All of them were locals. Hale recognized every face. 6 of them had disappeared over the last 15 years. Cases he had worked. Cases that had gone cold. Nobody had ever been found, alive or otherwise. The other 3 were still living in town. Not for long, Hale thought. At the bottom of the box, underneath all the others, was one more photograph. It was Sarah Whitmore. She was sitting on the edge of a bed in a motel room. Her eyes were wide. Her hands were in her lap. She wasn't tied up. She wasn't hurt. She was just sitting there, looking at the camera like she had been told to hold still. And in the mirror behind her, just barely visible, was the shoulder and arm of the man holding the camera. Hale couldn't see his face, but he could see the watch on his wrist. An old silver one, square face, leather band worn through at the buckle. He drove straight to Rachel's apartment and put the photograph on her kitchen table. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "He was wearing that watch when he checked in." Hale drove back to the motel. It was 11:13 at night. Elise was still at the front desk finishing her shift. He went upstairs to room 408. The crime scene tape was still across the door. He ducked under it. On the floor, just inside the doorway, was a fresh Polaroid. It hadn't been there that morning. He picked it up. It was a photograph of Elise Turner, taken through the lobby window. She was on the phone, smiling at something the person on the other end had said. The timestamp in the corner read, "Earlier that evening." Along the bottom, in the same black ink, were 4 words. "She leaves at 11:15. Hale looked at his watch. It was 11:14. He turned and ran. He was almost at the stairs when he stopped. There was another Polaroid on the floor, halfway down the hallway. He hadn't seen it on the way in. He picked it up without thinking. It was a photograph of him, taken from behind. Standing in the basement that morning, holding the shoebox. He stared at it. His legs wouldn't move. He was still standing there, frozen, when he heard the scream. He was too late. The front desk was empty. Elise's purse was still under the counter. Her phone was still plugged in behind the register, the screen lit up with a message that would never be read. Her coffee cup was still warm. Her chair was pushed back at an angle, as if she'd stood up suddenly. The corded desk phone was off its cradle, lying on the floor. The receiver was still emitting a dial tone. And on the counter, placed carefully next to the keyboard, was a single Polaroid. It was a photograph of the front desk. Elise wasn't in it, but there was a smear of something dark along the edge of the counter. Small. A handprint, maybe. Half wiped away. Hale touched it. It was still wet. That was the beginning. Over the next year, envelopes started arriving at the sheriff's office. No return address. postmarked from a different town each time. Inside was always a single Polaroid. A different face, a different street, a different quiet moment captured by someone the person in the picture never noticed. Along the bottom, in black ink, the same 4 words. They were here. Deputy Marcus Hale chased every one. He drove to Missoula. He drove to Helena. He drove to Billings and Great Falls, and once all the way to Spokane. He drove through the night, again and again, following postmarks to towns he'd never heard of, looking for people he'd never met. He was always too late. By the time he got there, the person in the photograph was already gone. He kept a map in his office. Red pins for every envelope, black pins for every person who vanished. By the end of the year, there were 11 red pins and 11 black pins, and they were the same pins. 11 people in 12 months. His wife left him in the spring. His sheriff put him on leave in the summer. By fall, he was driving on his own dime, sleeping in his car, calling strangers at 3 a.m. to warn them about a man none of them believed in. Nobody listened. Everybody vanished. The last envelope arrived in October. The postmark was from Bozeman, Montana, a college town 300 miles south of Hollow Creek. The photograph inside was of a young woman walking across a campus quad. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder. She was laughing at something on her phone. She was 20 years old. She had Marcus Hale's eyes and her mother's smile. And she was in her 2nd year of nursing school. She was his daughter. He knew. He couldn't do anything. Marcus Hale was found 4 days later in a motel room off Route 12. Not the Hollow Creek. A different one, 40 miles south. He was alive, but he wasn't talking. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a photograph of his daughter and rocking back and forth. He has been at the Warm Springs State Hospital ever since. I came across this story the way most stories find me, through an old friend. He was a detective once, worked homicide in the Pacific Northwest for 30 years before he retired to a cabin he can't afford to heat. We still talk on the phone every couple of weeks, mostly about nothing. A few months ago, he called me late at night. He sounded like he'd been drinking. He said he wanted to tell me about a case he'd never been able to put down. Not one of his own. One a friend of his had worked, in Montana, years back. He told me about a motel, a phone call at 3:17 in the morning, a photograph of a woman who had been missing for 11 years. He told me about a deputy named Marcus Hale, and about a daughter, and about envelopes that kept arriving. I didn't believe him at first, so I did the work. I pulled newspaper archives from 3 counties. I tracked down a retired sheriff in Hollow Creek who confirmed everything on the record, and a few things off it. I found the motel, or what's left of it. It closed 2 years ago. The windows are boarded up. The neon sign is still there, with the crack through the letter C. I drove to Warm Springs. They wouldn't let me see him. But a nurse on the evening shift told me that Marcus Hale still gets mail. Once a month. Always the same size envelope. Always the same handwriting. She said he opens every one. And she said the last time she checked on him, he was looking at a fresh Polaroid. and he was crying. She didn't see who was in the picture. Nobody has ever found Miles Rowan. Nobody has ever explained how he photographed Sarah Whitmore inside room 408. Nobody knows how a woman walked into a dead-end hallway at 2:41 in the morning and walked into a room that couldn't hold her. Some people believe Marcus Hale is a broken man who built a conspiracy out of grief, that the envelopes were sent by a copycat, or a cruel prank, or his own trembling hand. Other people believe him. I don't know which of them is right. I only know that last week my friend called me again. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke. He said an envelope had arrived at his cabin. No return address. He hasn't opened it yet. He says he isn't going to. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to The Unseen Hour. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday. And remember, some stories were never meant to be found.